In every family, when something went wrong, there was always one person everyone quietly looked at first, and it was you. Not because you had caused it, not because you deserved it either. It was simply easier for everyone else to point at you than to look at what was actually broken inside the home. You were the difficult one, the dramatic one, the problem child. Meanwhile, the exact same behavior in your sibling went completely unnoticed or was quietly excused every time. If any of that sounds familiar, this video will not just explain your childhood. It will explain a role you have been quietly playing for many long years. Long after you left that house, part of you still expects to be blamed. Still waits for someone to point a finger and say, "This is your fault." This is the psychology of the family scapegoat. And what happened to you was not random. It followed a pattern most families never learn to fully see. Picture a family dinner. Something breaks, plans fall apart, an argument starts. Before anyone even investigates what happened, one name is already floating quietly in the air. Yours. Not because anyone checked the facts, not because you were even in the room, but because in this family, you were always the explanation for everything wrong. Meanwhile, your sibling could do something genuinely hurtful, and somehow the story would shift. They were stressed. They didn't mean it. They just need more support right now. You noticed this pattern long before you had language for it. You felt the unfairness in your body before you could ever explain it in words to anyone. Maybe you tried to point it out once. Maybe you said, "That's not fair, I didn't even do that," and you were told you were being too sensitive, or dramatic, or that you were making things about yourself again. So you learned something important. Defending yourself only confirmed you were exactly the problem they said you were. This is not simply sibling rivalry or a parent playing favorites once in a while. This is a fixed role. One person consistently assigned all the family's dysfunction to carry. And understanding that role, where it comes from, and why it was assigned to you specifically, is where we're going next. Because it was never actually random. Family systems theory describes something called the identified patient. One member, unconsciously assigned to carry and express the dysfunction that actually belongs to the entire family system. In healthy families, problems are owned collectively. In unhealthy ones, the family finds it easier to locate the problem in one person rather than examine the system itself. That person becomes the scapegoat. Usually the child who is most sensitive, most honest, most likely to notice and name what nobody else once acknowledged out loud. Ironically, the scapegoat is often the emotionally healthiest member of the family. Their reactions are actually appropriate responses to a genuinely dysfunctional environment they were placed inside. But because their reactions disrupt the family's fragile peace, they get labeled as the problem. The dramatic one, the difficult one, the reason everyone else feels so unsettled. This allows everyone else in the family to avoid a much more uncomfortable question. What is actually wrong with us? And why does it keep repeating generation after generation? It is far easier to say, it's just them. They're too sensitive, they're impossible, than to sit with the harder truth that the whole system needs real examining. Once this role is assigned, it becomes remarkably sticky. Family members will often unconsciously provoke or reinterpret situations just to keep the scapegoat exactly where they have always been. Here's what happens inside a child assigned this role. Being blamed constantly for things you did and did not do eventually stops feeling like an event. It starts to feel like an identity. You begin to believe, on some deep unconscious level, that you really are the source of the trouble around you. This creates a devastating internal contradiction. Somewhere that the blame is unfair. But you have been told otherwise so many times that you doubt your own perception. Psychologists call this a kind of gaslighting by repetition. Not always intentional, but relentless enough that eventually you stop trusting your own read of reality entirely. You develop a very specific kind of hypervigilance, not just about the mood in the room, but about who is about to blame you for it next. Even in adulthood, in completely unrelated situations, You feel a flash of guilt before anyone has said a single accusing word. Your body is still braced for blame. You often become fiercely, almost compulsively fair to others because you know intimately what it feels like to be blamed for something that was never truly your fault. And here's the open loop worth holding on to. The scapegoat is very often the one family member who could actually see the truth most clearly all along. Not because they were troubled, but because trouble already existed, and they were simply the one honest enough or unguarded enough to reflect it back to everyone else. That clarity, that honesty, made them dangerous to a family that depended on not looking too closely. And so the family redirected all of it back onto them instead. You see it in the adult, who still feels a wave of guilt at family gatherings, bracing for an old argument to resurface with their name attached to it. You see it in the person who over-explains every decision they make, terrified that without a clear defense, someone will find a way to make it their fault. You see it in the sibling who left home the moment they could and still feels a strange mixture of relief and grief every single time they visit. You see it in the friend who apologizes automatically the instant a conflict begins, even when they can clearly see they did absolutely nothing wrong in the situation. You see it in the employee who assumes they are about to be blamed the moment a manager asks to speak with them privately, heart already racing beforehand. You see it in the person who struggles deeply to trust their own memory of events, because for years their version of what happened was consistently overwritten by others. And you see it in the specific aching loneliness of realizing that even the people meant to protect you needed someone to blame more than they needed truth. The scapegoat often becomes hyper-independent as an adult, quietly convinced that needing anyone at all is simply one more way to eventually become someone's convenient problem again. They may also become the most compassionate person in every room they enter, extending to others the fairness and benefit of the doubt they were never once given. This is the paradox of the scapegoat role. It creates deep, lasting wounds while somehow also producing some of the most empathetic, perceptive people you will ever meet. I promised we would come back to something. The scapegoat is very often the healthiest, most perceptive person in the entire family system. Let's talk about exactly why. Healthy children respond to unhealthy environments with distress. They act out, withdraw, or protest because something is genuinely wrong and their nervous system knows it immediately. An unhealthy family cannot tolerate that signal. So instead of asking what is wrong, they ask what is wrong with the child who is expressing it out loud. This means the scapegoat's so-called dysfunction was frequently just visible, honest distress, while everyone else's silence was mistaken incorrectly for calm, functioning family peace. You are not the problem. You are the smoke alarm. And it is always easier to unplug the alarm than to admit the house itself was quietly on fire. That reframe changes everything. Your sensitivity was not a flaw to be corrected. It was accurate perception in an environment that desperately needed someone to perceive it accurately. Your anger was not drama. It was appropriate anger at real unfairness. Your sadness was not weakness. It was a completely reasonable response to being consistently, unfairly blamed. The family did not reject you because something was wrong with you. They rejected you because you were, in some quiet way, telling a truth they could not bear. So what do you do with this now? You start by separating what you were told from what actually happened. Those are two very different things entirely. You practice noticing the old guilt when it rises and gently asking, is this actually mine to carry? Or is this simply an old, familiar pattern returning again? You allow yourself relationships where you do not have to earn your innocence, where being wrong occasionally does not mean becoming the explanation for everyone else's unhappiness again. You give yourself permission to trust your own memory, your own perception, your own sense of what was fair and what clearly, obviously, was not fair at all. The role you were assigned was never a reflection of your character. It was a reflection of a family that needed somewhere else to place its own discomfort. You were never the problem in that house. You were simply the one brave enough and honest enough to feel it. And that was never something to fix.